So, hi everyone, my name's Heidi. I'm from the Space Skills Alliance, and I'm going to talk today a bit about an EU Horizon project that we're involved in and started about a year and a half ago now. So in case you're not familiar with Space Skills Alliance, we describe ourselves a bit as a think tank consultancy trying to tackle the UK's space skills gap, working with employers, with policy makers and training providers to try and kind of tackle the gap. So I'm not really going to try and talk too much about ourselves today, and instead I'm going to talk about the ASTRAIOS project, which has, as you read at the start, a horrifically long and nicely convoluted acronym. It wouldn't really be a nice EU Horizon project without it. But this project started in January 2023, and really over the 3 years our aims are to look at the landscape of space education and training, identify what the industry will need in the future and try and bridge the gaps, partly through kind of some research but also through actually kind of identifying and completing actions which will help people have pathways into the space sector. So you can see the logos of our partners up on the board here. It's quite academic heavy, but we've got representatives from all across Europe, from Crete to France, and sadly I've not managed to make it over to Crete yet on a nice visit. Annoyingly, it seems like my laptop is pinging, so I'm just going to share that again and that will be quiet for you. We have 2 UK partners, which we're very thankful for, considering the Brexit challenges that were happening at the time of signing all the paperwork. So that's the University of Strathclyde and us at Space Skills Alliance. So the first bit of work that I want to talk about, and there are so many, so I really can't cover all the things that we're doing, but the first bit is from the University of Twente, and they are really the ones who are kind of baselining or investigating a lot of the space education and research that's happening across Europe. And when I'm talking about education and research, we're not talking about outreach and schools, we're talking about universities, kind of vocational qualifications and upwards. And so what they've been working on the previous year is trying to look at a lot of automated tooling methods to try and scrape and extract information about degrees that are on offer across Europe in the space industry, or feed people into the space industry. And so they focused very much on kind of collecting a lot of data, but then analysing 140 of these degrees in depth. And so they're looking at the degrees and extracting the courses and extracting the modules. There's about 3,800 odd modules that they're investigating in detail, doing a lot of keyword analysis and trying to identify what's being taught, how it links to other modules and how it links to other topics, and kind of identifying where are the gaps. They've produced an online database which can be searched if you go through the website. It can also kind of give you quite a lot of useful information. It may be helpful to investigate it, but things you can pull out, for example, and these are just a couple of quick graphs I pulled out and plotted, but you can look at, for example, what language different courses are primarily taught in, or where different master's courses are offered across Europe. So for this one I chose here, and I can't remember exactly what it correlates to, unfortunately, but the kind of prevalence was in the UK and France. So I imagine it might have been kind of spacecraft engineering that I looked at. So from this has kind of really laid the groundworks for a lot of the rest of the project. So we're really trying to kind of link everything back to that first point around what is the landscape of education and training across Europe. And so one of the ways that we've then started to kind of extract a lot of information is looking at taxonomies. And anyone who knows me knows I love a good taxonomy and classifying things. I think I spend a lot of my time doing that. But we kind of gathered a lot of the data that the University of Twente had extracted and looked at, well, how do we actually classify this information in a useful way to kind of enable research to happen. So we've taken, I'll show you in a second what a high-level view looks like, but we've taken things like ESCO, the European Standards and Competencies, Competencies and Occupancies Framework, Copernicus Frameworks, EARC's frameworks, PwC, and our in-spacecraft framework as well, trying to align it all together to make something that is at a high level looks a bit like this. And so what we've done here is try and kind of group a lot of the space education and training into usable categories for further analysis. So this is where then we've tried to link it closely with the work that we're doing on the space training catalogue to try and kind of make sure we've got alignment essentially across Europe and the UK in terms of the language that we're using to describe space education and training. So the space training catalogue, if you haven't seen it, it's a catalogue of space training. does what it says on the tin, but it contains lots of space training. We're almost at 600 now, 600 training opportunities, about 900 odd degrees, which is about to go through a refresh to kind of take in this year's. And for some members, it might be useful that we are currently developing this further. So if you have any thoughts or input on what you would like to see in it, please do shout at the lunch break. But what it looks like is essentially a kind of catalogue where you can go and search for training, same for degrees. And you'll notice along the top, we've now kind of made sure we've aligned all of the kind of categories that you can search for with EU tasks. So everything, although taxonomy is space knowledge, everything kind of matches to one another. So when we're talking about space education and training, hopefully we're all talking the same language. So then what we've done here with the training catalogue is try and show where there's gaps in training. So you can see, and I'm aware it's quite small, so you might not be able to see, and I'm not going to try and zoom in because I'll probably break the laptop, but you can see that in certain areas there are no degrees and no training being offered for certain kind of sub-themes, which might imply that we might need some more training in these areas if they're a kind of skills need area. We've then taken a kind of step in a slightly different way, not just looking at education and training as what can be on offer, but also what have people actually studied and how have people progressed into the space industry before. So through ASTRAIOS, we've got access to LinkedIn Talent Insights, which is essentially data on everyone's LinkedIn profile. So when you're filling out your LinkedIn profile, what it's really doing is going into this great big database that LinkedIn is using and selling. Unfortunately, there's nothing like no sort of free things there, is it? But it's selling, and we are buying access to that data so we can do lots of analysis to work out how people got into the space industry and what degrees it's studied. So we've identified around 270,000 profiles of people working in space or adjacent to space in the EU. And we're looking at trends in things like workforce migration, tenure, salary, gender demographics, retention, and what degrees people actually did. So I'm aware this is slightly blurry, so forgive me for a horribly blurry graph. But what we can see here is we can then look at things like what has the overall workforce done in terms of a degree or subject area qualification, and what has the incoming workforce got under their belt. So I think the kind of stark difference here is that the overall workforce, aerospace engineering is kind of common, but not that common. But the people who have entered the workforce in the last 12 months overwhelmingly have studied aerospace engineering, whereas electronics engineering is on the decline. So there's quite a few kind of interesting things that we can start to analyse and bring it all back to the current provision of space education and training that Twente were working on. We're also doing a bit of work this year around the analysis of CVs. So we've got about 6,500 CVs, not LinkedIn profiles, but CVs that people have uploaded themselves to these sorts of websites that you do when you go looking for a job. You put your kind of CV on a careers website and hope that someone says, yes, I want to hire you. And we've got about 6,500 of them covering about 20 years. And so we're trying to, again, identify all these different sorts of things, like what skills have people listed on their CV, what qualifications have they got, what country did they got their qualification in versus where are they working now, and what degrees have they studied. So that's work we're doing at the moment, with reports probably to be out next year at this point. But I'll show you a really quick graph. It's a bit messy, don't trust it entirely yet. I'll kind of caveat that there. But this is a control chart, which is often used for measuring statistically significant changes in a trend. They're often used in hospitals, for example, to see whether kind of there's more falls than usual than you'd expect on a ward. So what we can see here is that it's a proportion of electronics engineering related CVs and skills. In 2005, this isn't a percentage, but it kind of started off as a reasonable rate. It's over the years kind of going down. So we can then start drawing some conclusions here. So either electronics engineers aren't being trained by universities, so aren't entering the workforce. So there's fewer of them uploading their CV online. Or electronics engineers are getting really, really popular, so they don't need to upload their CV online. People are just headhunting them and grabbing them and saying, come and work for me. Or it could be a combination of the two. So we're not quite sure, we can't definitively say, but those are sort of trends that we can start investigating and looking at. And when we compare them to things like what level of education training there is across Europe for electronics engineers, and the fact that there's fewer electronics engineers entering the workforce, and salaries are quite high for electronics engineers compared to other areas, we can probably start drawing some conclusions. So we're not just doing reports though, as much as I love a good report. There will be further ones coming out around kind of demographics, workforce evolution, things like diversity inclusion across Europe, which is quite an interesting topic as well, and transferable skills, so not just space-specific technical skills. But we're not just doing those reports, we're also working on creating kind of some practical things as well. So the International Space University, we are kind of working on creating boot camps specifically focused on space entrepreneurship, and they will be starting kind of later in the year and next year. And then with Strathclyde, with Technical University of Crete, and with Twente, we're focusing on creating MOOCs, which will kind of cover skills gaps that are identified in Earth observation, GNSS. Always get that one wrong. There's a website link there. Check it out. There's lots of information. There's more that I can talk about today. That's it. So hopefully chat to you over lunch about some of these things, and thank you so much.